So today on Team Futurism, I am meeting with Micah Redding, who is the president of the Christian Transhumanism Foundation. Is that what you're called? Christian Transhumanism Foundation?
Christian Transhumanist Association. Yeah.
That's right. Okay, that sounded wrong when I said it. It's one of those things I've only read. I've never said out loud. So, and I've been aware of Micah for a while. I've been writing about transhumanism for the last couple of years, mostly on my Medium account. I think also like for Aereo magazine, a couple places. But Micah's name tends to come up in this world just because, and this is something that I've written about, transhumanism, which is kind of like a geeky, nerdy Silicon Valley tech thing. There's a component to it that does have a spiritual side to it, in the sense that transhumanism kind of fundamentally is about life extension and overcoming death and disease, these sorts of things, which kind of historically, anytime you're ever talking about overcoming death, there usually is a religious component to it.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
People can kind of be forgiven for thinking that transhumanism itself is kind of a religious movement. Zoltan Istvan has talked about this a little bit. He's kind of done a little bit of reach out to the Christian community. He's at the U.S. transhumanism president guy of a few years back. But yeah, so this is, I have been critical of the Christian transhumanism movement, just because I come from the humanist side of things, the more materialism side of things. But I have some goofy views about this too. I have some funny views that I think will be kind of interesting to bounce off you. But for the most part, I want to get your side of the story, see where you're coming from. And why don't we kind of just start with your background in this movement and what got you interested with it?
Yeah, so I actually got interested. So I grew up, for people who aren't familiar with my world, I grew up in as a preacher's kid in a religious group called the Churches of Christ, which most people would kind of identify as a sort of fundamentalist or certainly conservative group of people. And one of the nice things about that, or one of the big takeaways I had from growing up in it, though, was that this idea of studying for yourself. And so I took that really seriously. I took it more seriously than my Sunday school teachers maybe expected. And that led me to really kind of, dig into science and philosophy and technology and the kind of larger history of Christianity, through some well-known people like C.S. Lewis, people like theologians like N.T. Wright, and people like G.K. Chesterton and so forth, kind of first exposed me to some of the larger aspects of Christianity. And what that did is it kind of led me through a just kind of rethinking everything about my faith, everything about religion. And I came to see that actually Christianity was really invested in the body and the material world. And because of these things, you really couldn't separate out, science and technology and all these things. These were actually part of the material world, and that's part of the Christian story, part of the Christian narrative. And that's really when I first started encountering transhumanist communities in the 90s. And so I started, kind of engaging and reading certainly a lot. And most people I interacted with probably, there was just a range of reactions to me showing up there as a Christian in those spaces. But one of the reactions was the idea of well, aren't you as a Christian, fundamentally vested in getting out of the world, getting out of your body, being anti longevity and life extension and anti science and all these kinds of things? And for me, the answer was no. And in fact, my understanding of the Christian tradition is that no, that's not what Christianity is about. Although it has often presented itself that way in the kind of American Christianity that I saw growing up. So anyway, that's how I got started in being involved in transhumanism. I really recognized it as a secular kind of counterpart to the Christianity that I understood, that I was coming to understand in my own kind of faith journey.
So right now, when you drop the name transhumanism, kind of to anyone, it makes people possibly feel a little bit uncomfortable. This is why
Mhm.
I actually, consider myself a futurist rather than a transhumanist.
Sure.
Futurism, kind of like the broader label, right? And so I just say futurist rather than transhumanist. Although there is like an agenda to transhumanism, so that term does absolutely make sense. But when you say transhumanism in a Christian context to Christian folks who maybe are maybe skeptical of things like stem cell research or like any medicalization efforts for longevity, let's say. Does that word, like, is it like a dirty word to them? Are they scared of it? I mean, what's that, or am I reading too much into that?
Yeah, most people are just not going to know the word, and they're going to
Okay,
try to parse it, and they're going to say trans, and they're going to say,
right.
okay, are we talking about transgender stuff? And then, and so they're going to try to like pull it apart and try to understand what we're going with, or a lot of people just focus on it as the humanism part. They're like, oh, so it's a humanist kind of movement, something like that. And so most people don't know really what to make of that term. Um, there are groups of Christians who know a lot about that term, um, and some of them are um, coming from they know a lot about it because they've identified it as a kind of boogeyman that that they are super afraid of. That's not the community that I grew up in or that I circulate in. It's more of a, I would say, like an extreme kind of fringe of Christianity, and yet there are lots of people in that fringe in certain places, and who when the Christian Transhumanist Association had our first conference, there was another conference going on at the same time that was Christianity and Transhumanism conference, but it was anti, right, like Christians against transhumanism, and their conference was easily, 10 times as big as ours.
Right.
So you can imagine how that in many circles fear sells, right? Like, but I think for the majority, the mainstream of Christianity, it's just not a very known thing. There are areas like the Vatican and so forth who spend a lot of energy focused on thinking about some of this stuff in a serious way. That they have their own astronomers and so forth that are thinking about science in a deep way, and so they people like that are going to be familiar with it in a different sense. But I'd say just for the majority of people, it just doesn't mean anything, and so then you have to like talk about what it might actually entail.
That's interesting to me because I mean, I grew up Christian. If I were still a Christian today, I do think that I would very much be drawn to this movement because
Mm.
there's something a little bit subversive about it in the way that standard Christianity just kind of isn't. And so it's kind of like cool in that sense, right? You do, I think, take it further than that, though. For example, you had this slogan on your website. I'm not sure if it's still there, but you say that Christian transhumanism is the future of faith.
Mm.
So you make this argument that it's not just like another alternate way of doing the Christian experience, it's the future of the faith. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. So ultimately, from a Christian perspective, I'm going to say um, there's a set of concerns and responsibilities that are really at the heart of faith. And so, from Genesis 1, first page of the Bible, you have the creation story, but I think more importantly, you have the account of what humanity is. And it says that humanity is created in the image and likeness of God, to be like God and to participate in the work of creation as God does. And so, um, this is this we call it the creation mandate. It's a calling to engage the material world as God engages the material world, as a creator, as someone who blesses and names and categorizes and uplifts creation, right? And so that concern means if you're a Christian, you can't escape that calling. In fact, that calling is core to the whole Bible, the whole Scripture. Everything that happens in Scripture is like playing out of that core calling for humanity to participate in the creative work of God. So yeah, um, so when people say, okay, well, I'm a Christian, I'm not interested in science, I'm not interested in technology, or something like this, my thought is you haven't properly understood like the full span of what the faith actually calls you to, and so the the future of Christianity is actually engaging with this core calling, right? Like Christianity doesn't really have a coherent future, I don't believe, outside of engaging with like this thing that's really at the heart of what faith is. And so yeah, that's the sense in which I would say it's the future of faith. It's I think looking forward 50 or 100 years or whatever, 1,000 years, I fully expect there to be a Catholic church, an Orthodox church, Protestant churches, maybe something else we haven't invented yet. And yet I think they will all be transhumanist. And they will all, in fact, see that as core to their faith and say, of course, we were always transhumanists. We didn't always know the term, but that's what we've been all along in the deepest sense, and that's what we are, invested in some sense.
Yeah, it's been said that one reason that Christianity has survived so well over the years is that it has this capacity to adapt to the times and I mean, right now, back in the day, Christianity wasn't exactly the most pro-science thing. Nowadays, Christians are very adamant to say, oh, look at all of these scientists who are Christians and leading their field. Not only that, here's why it makes sense to still have this worldview, because I've heard it said, this is maybe C.S. Lewis talking point, that God made the world so that it all made sense. If it didn't make sense, it wouldn't make sense to be a scientist because there would be so much chaos, whereas there's not chaos, there's order when you look out into the world. And so that is, right. It's natural to be a scientist, to look and appreciate the order and the beauty of the world. Right. This is where I do think it gets really interesting and exciting, and a little sci-fi even, when you do start thinking about the future of humanity with the layers of some of these transhumanist concepts on top of it, because I'm thinking in particular of Frank J. Tipler, who I notice I believe is on the board of your organization. He has this idea that when the singularity happens, you might have to spell this out for me a little bit more, but it's something to the effect of, when the singularity happens, we all will merge with God. We will be one with God in like this energy sense, in the sense of matter and energy. It's not some like spiritually thing that you might imagine when you're reading the scriptures, but it actually is this like actual in the universe physical manifestation of us being one with God as one energy, life form, and source. Can you tell me a little bit about his theories? Because I do find it very fascinating.
Yeah, so probably like to be precise, I would have to like unpack some of that stuff. So his general picture, which has integrated the idea of like the technological singularity, but it ultimately is about the kind of far future of the cosmos. And so this theory of Tipler's was, I think he formulated it in the 80s. He first kind of published about it maybe the early 90s. A book called The Physics of Immortality came out I think in 94. And I read that, and that was one of the ways I got in to this and interested in this. And basically he says, okay, what would it take for life to survive forever? And so he imagines, of course, the planet will eventually be consumed by the sun if nothing changes. So life is going to have to leave this planet, and so he talks about the technology that would allow life to leave this planet, and then it's going to have to expand outward, and it's going to expand at some fraction of the speed of light, and eventually it's going to encompass the galaxy, and then galaxies beyond and beyond that, and so forth. And what he envisions is that at some ultimate point of time, that life having spread across the entire visible universe will then be able to coordinate its activities to actually shape the universe. And this is where we there's a lot of speculative physics at this point. We know the universe is accelerating outward. We don't exactly know what's possible. But if life could actually change the shape of the universe and bring it back so that it collapses in on itself, then he worked out a scenario where, as life is kind of converging on this omega point of the cosmos, returning to a singularity, the amount of energy available goes to infinity, the amount of computation happening goes to infinity, the amount of intelligent processing and control over the universe goes to infinity in finite time, so that as you reach that kind of final singularity, you've actually lived an infinite amount of time. In another sense, the time just keeps stretching out because you go faster and faster and faster the closer you get to it. And so in that kind of convergence of all life in this ultimate kind of connected unity, yes, you have the entire universe being encompassed and controlled by life, which knows everything there is to know, which examines everything and discovers everything there is to discover, all the way to regenerating all life forms that have ever lived, and then bringing them into this ever expanding, ever increasing capacity for life. And so that's Tipler's kind of ultimate speculation. And when you kind of just generalize that a little bit, then the question is ultimately like, when life kind of reaches beyond our current framework, when life expands beyond the planet and adopts new forms, technological, digital, artificial intelligence, whatever, what kinds of life forms are going to emerge from this? And if you believe that there are strong reasons for life to cooperate over these kinds of scales, rather than to just fight with each other, if you believe that there are reasons for life to cooperate and collaborate, then you see it as a kind of convergent intelligence, a kind of convergent society, a kind of convergent organism, a kind of convergent intelligence that we all would participate in to some degree. And that those kind of possibilities unlock all kinds of scenarios that look increasingly like traditional religious scenarios. And I think that's where a lot of that discussion jumps into some interesting places.
Yeah, I would really recommend Tipler has I believe it's a TED Talk, anyway, a fairly long video on YouTube that's quite fascinating. It's very interesting to listen to. It really does jump into science fiction. I mean, it gets pretty quickly into the world of science fiction, which, to be fair, all of the transhumanists are very much treading in the waters of science fiction. But like in a way, we're living in such a science fiction world right now. If you look up what's happening with CRISPR, or just Elon Musk's Neuralink, or I mean, there's so many technologies right now that even just walking around with a cell phone is kind of ridiculous when you realize the power that you hold in your hands. People have said pretty often just having a cell phone makes us transhuman, because we have offboarded so much of our cognition into this little device, and effectively it's like a second brain for ourselves, and it's our memory and so many things. Like it's just like a different way of looking at it, but that's true. Like it's real and it's true, and it's happening now. And we do have digital selves, right? Where if your Twitter account, if you get kicked off Twitter, you kind of like lost a part of yourself, because your memories are there. Like literally parts of your soul, in a sense, are kind of like on these dumb platforms, right? Yeah. Which is just super interesting. But how comfortable are you, just in general, but maybe speaking as a Christian? Are there any technologies that make you nervous or uncomfortable? Any sort of, destroying the body and merging with machines? Is there anything along that continuum that makes you a little bit uncomfortable? Given that, for example, very, very biblical concept is that the body is sacred, right? This is something I've written a little bit about, is how I don't think that it's consistent to say that the body is sacred plus being a transhumanist. I think that consciousness is sacred. That would be what I would say. Gets complicated on my side in the sense that our consciousness is so closely entangled with like our gut microbiome. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like you can't just do away with the body that easily. In a sense, like, you know, more and more research is coming out that like depression is tied to what's happening in your gut rather than your
Right.
brain. You know, so it's, you can't easily say, oh, we can just discard the body and become digital beings. It's so much more complicated. But in any case, like, how do you sit with some of those concepts with, you know, maybe altering the body outside of recognition?
Yeah. So there's nothing fundamental in the sense of like, okay, this technology is off limits or something like that. A lot of people will ask, you know, how far is too far? This kind of question, and my answer is always, um, there is no uh, degree which is too far. It's always the question of what direction. So what direction are we headed in? Not, you know, how far. Because we want to go, you know, in some sense, Christianity innately calls you to go too far, calls you to go to infinity. How good should we be? Well, unlimited, right? How long should we live? Unlimited. That's the prospect of eternal life, right? That life is good to with no boundaries. And so we always want to go in an unlimited direction. It's just a question of which direction are we going in. So when I evaluate something, like if I were to evaluate, you know, a particular surgery or something like that, I'm going to look at a lot of things. You know, what risks, how easy is it to reverse if there's a mistake? You know, this is what I would think about with Neuralink, right? Like, so, okay, it's a minor surgery. So that's a first thing. Okay, maybe it's not major from a physical standpoint. So, okay. Then what happened? Like, how, you know, how easy is it to reverse if something goes wrong? Um, if I become dependent on it, do I then become dependent on the Neuralink company, and what's the relationship that's going to be entailed by that? And am I, you know, like, so at every stage, I want to think through like what kinds of choices am I making about my own agency, my own sense of development, like character and so forth. Where am I going? Where is this leading me? Is this making me more dependent, more independent, more dependent on people I want to be dependent on, you know, or otherwise? And so I would say the body is sacred, but not in the sense of you can't do anything to it. It's sacred in the sense that it is our best and most direct tool. And so, but that, you know, doesn't mean. Um, and when I say tool, I mean that in a very honoring way as well. It's a tool that allows us to communicate and connect with people in profound ways. But when we need a surgery, we cut it open, right? And that's also part of the sacredness of the body. You're recognizing that the body serves a function, and in order to serve that function, it needs to be dealt with in this specific way, right? So we do cut it open. We do change things. We do repair things. We do work to reshape it. You know, even if you're doing exercise or dietary interventions or something like this, you're making choices about how to change your body. And so if we imagined going to like a totally digital substrate, my concern wouldn't be like, is my body made of carbon or silicon? My concern would be, is this allowing me to communicate in a very high bandwidth way and connect in a very high bandwidth way and engage immersively in a high bandwidth way with the world around me and people around me and things like this? That would be the way I would frame those questions. And you know, for the foreseeable future, um, we're going to have tough choices in those areas, right? And so there's not going to be any hard and fast rules. There's going to be an idea of like, how are we orienting this towards our growth as both individuals and as people connected to the communities that we are connected to.
Right, right. So, I mean, you know, kind of inherently, a lot of these concepts become political pretty quickly. And when I'm scrolling through your website, I do, you know, one section jumped out at me and it was politics and society. If I can read a quote from this, and the first part, you know, of this quote that I'll just kind of skip over, but it says that we're in the age of superabundance is about to or may occur. So, and this is something that I think is, one of the most exciting things happening in the world right now is we if we play our cards right, we might actually end up with an abundance of things like energy, right? We're very close to the technologies exist. There's very expensive, nuclear energy is kind of like here, but it's just expensive to roll out, that sort of thing. But we're on the brink of having an abundance of clean natural energy. Same with food, same with a lot of things. Again, if we play our cards right, we could have a very bright and beautiful future ahead of us.
Mm-hmm.
Then it becomes like a political question of how do you distribute all of that abundance. And this paragraph jumped out to me on your website. Again, this was under Politics Society. Your website says, our political system must evolve. We should strive for societies with a strong safety net and a foundation that poverty and lack of opportunity is eliminated, whilst also constraining how high our most productive can fly. That sounds pretty left wing to me. I'm not saying that you're not left wing. I have no idea where politics are, but to me, I mean that would maybe rile up the nerves of a lot of like political conservatives or Christian conservatives. Do you consider yourself, with this view, like sort of a socialist type of guy, or what? How do you see this in the world of politics?
Okay, so I need to do a fact check here, and we just put that up, so I want to make sure. So there may be typos and so forth, but it should say without constraining how high people can fly, as my latest recollection of it.
Oh,
But
it says, whilst not constraining how high
yeah.
our most productive can fly. Yeah. So I might have misread that.
So I know. So I didn't write that. I know the person who did, and I'm pretty sure he would not be happy with being called a socialist. And so the fact is, within the Christian Transhumanist Association, we have just a wide variety of different viewpoints, and
Yeah.
that's both religious, right, across the Christian spectrum, and it's also political. And my hope is that in the political area, what we can agree on is like the concerns. And what we're going to disagree on and hopefully like help to like debate and work out is a better understanding of solutions, right? So hopefully we do build a society where like we have abundant energy, we have unlimited access to food, clothing, shelter, and all the kinds of tools that would allow someone to be, to develop their agency and their creativity and their ability to contribute meaningfully to the world. Now, do we get there from a from like a universal basic income proposal, or from something else? And that's going to be a debated issue. And but I hope everybody can agree that eliminating poverty and eliminating hunger and eliminating various forms of deprivation will be a good thing, and that's a thing that we can work on together and work towards solutions together. And part of the reason for talking about this is that we believe that technology is a big part of those solutions, right? So we do want a safety net for people, and we do want to protect people and so forth. The question how, though, does not necessarily eliminate any particular political perspective, as long as you recognize that it would be better for us to live in a world without poverty, without hunger, those kinds of things. And it's very core to Christianity. Jesus, very early on preaches. John the Baptist sends a messenger and says, what, are you the Messiah, or are we supposed to wait for someone else? And Jesus says, well, look around. Like the blind are being healed, the deaf hear, the lame walk, poor are being fed. Like these kinds of things are signs of the kingdom of God at work. And so they are things that that we do care about. Regardless of the specifics of how that works out. Like I would want to keep that in focus. I don't know if that answered your question. That was
It kind of does. I mean, I do nicely get the sense that you have arranged your organization so that it's welcoming to people of all political perspectives, which is kind of nice. There's nothing about it that like, turns me off or turns other versions of myself off when I used to be quite a bit more conservative. I appreciate that. I think that, it is such a, this is dabbling in a world that is so dependent upon like technology and just where it takes us. I think it needs to be a little politically flexible. I also think that anything in the transhumanist world, it kind of draws in folks who are a little bit of the libertarian bent, whether they lean conservative or liberal, probably just because there's a little bit of, pro technology, pro let me do what I want, angle to this. And that's very much like where Zoltan Istvan, comes on the spectrum, where he's like adamantly libertarian, even though like if you talk to him any given day, he kind of sounds pretty lefty or pretty like, pro-American rights on the right. You know what I mean? Right. So I mean, I think that that's a very fair and rational position to take. I can't have you on the call without getting a little bit into my goofy perspectives on this. I want to run some ideas past you, and this is fun for me because it directly conflicts with the Christian transhumanism. And online, I do some like pro-atheism things online, and I've debated Fazale Rana like on these points. So this is something I just have a lot of fun doing. I wrote this article just on Medium, Satanic Transhumanism, The Future of Reason. I wrote this a couple of years ago. Bizarrely, it's like my most popular article on Medium, which is just like hilarious to me. I have no idea why, but every week it gets a couple hundred views, which is like why? Who's reading this thing? But in any case, it's fun. So this perspective, and I want to get your thoughts on this. This perspective kind of came to me by dabbling in a little bit of the world of transhumanism plus the world of Satanism, of all things. And I'm not like an adamant Satanist, just like I'm not necessarily an adamant transhumanist. I just think that they're cool concepts, and I think that it's you need to pay attention to them if you're going to be like a modern person into tech, which I am. But so I have this goofy view that one, transhumanism, it's kind of inherently occultish. It comes from the world of, like, it's rooted in Zoroastrianism, if you go far back enough, which is this view that God isn't going to solve all of our problems. We need to take the reins on our own fate and create heaven on earth, in a sense. And then, there's some roots of this also with the Greek god that gets fire from the gods and comes down and takes it to humanity. We're kind of like running with these concepts too, that despite the gods, we are going to take over our own fate and we are going to become gods ourselves. There's some like, obviously these are just ancient stories, but there are elements of this that are rooted in transhumanism up to like the modern age, where you have someone like Jack Parsons, the engineer who created rocket fuel and the first jet engine, I believe. He was like deeply occultish, but deeply wanted to overcome death and these sorts of things. These are all like very, very like out there people, right? Out there views. Because of the nature of transhumanism, where it's a little bit occultish and it's a little bit kind of inherently religious, it's like overcoming death. That's like a theme of it. It does have these religious symbolism elements just tied to it. My argument for why Satanism makes sense as the layer of symbolism to put over it rather than Christianity is that if you go back to the biblical stories, one reading of like Genesis is that, God is the tyrant and God says, only obey me and never, look into the world and discover your own truth. Only get truth from me. Whereas Satan is like, no, like Adam and Eve, you should go explore the world, discover your own truth, and be free on your own terms. And so he leads the way, symbolically. No Satanist actually believes in Satan, of course, but symbolically leads the way of like, be your own champion and find truth for yourself and overcome death on your own terms, not like through this God being tyrant figure in this story. So that could be used, Satanism, could be used as a layering of mythology, the layering of quote unquote like religion that makes sense with the transhumanism movement. Okay, a little bit of wacky theory. I think it's a lot of fun. Let me throw it at you, and what do you think about that?
Yeah, so it's funny. I talking with a family member a while back um, about what I believe. He listened to me and he said that just sounds like that's Satanism. And he was an adherent of Satanism at the time. I don't know whether he still is, but he was he was looking into it and kind of buying into it, and he was like, but this is your version of Christianity is to him was what he understood Satanism to be. Now, I think that there's some. So I'll make some divisions. I don't think my version of Christianity is actually Satanism, and I'll tell you why. Um, so in Genesis 1, God says, "I'm going to make humanity to be like God." Right? He says, "I'm going to make a human in my image, and this human will be like God and rule in the same way that I do." In Genesis 2, you actually get them starting to play this out. God actually is kind of leading humanity into this work of being like God and so forth. But there's this prohibition of the trees, and so in Genesis 3, you get the serpent comes along and says, "Oh, the reason there's this prohibition is because God doesn't actually want you to be like God. So go ahead and take this fruit, and then you'll become like God." And then against his wishes. And so the serpent is essentially saying, um, the promise God made you that you would become like God, that's a lie. So you're going to have to take it into your own hands and make it happen, right? And but as a Christian, I'm going to go with, okay, it wasn't a lie. They were really supposed to become like God. This is really the trajectory of humanity. Humanity is really in the process of becoming like God. And then, as we follow the biblical story through Christ, we actually attain to union with God and are able to be transformed into the glory and knowledge and power of God. And that's the culmination of the biblical story. And this is not just my reading of it. This is the Orthodox, particularly the Eastern Orthodox interpretation of it. It's if you dig into theology, it's the core kind of theology that often gets hushed because it's not helpful for keeping kids in line, maybe. But so it's maybe not the one that you hear a lot, but it's been there for thousands of years. It's the core theology. We are to become the likeness of God, and that is, I think, in every way, shape, and form. And it's a process. And this is the thing where I would differ. I think that Satanism misses, at least my understanding of it, is this idea of, okay, I'm going to do it on my own terms. I'm going to take it into my own hands and kind of make myself into a God kind of independently. It runs up against a real problem in the world, which is nothing happens independently. Like the only way we ever do anything is collaborate with others, right? If I catch a disease or sickness today, like tomorrow, I'm going to be looking to a healthcare system and doctors and scientific research that has been done that is able to address the thing that I have need of, right? So no matter what I do, no matter how much I can achieve or contribute, I'm never going to be able to be wholly capable of being independent. It's always going to be collaborative. It's always going to be part of a relationship with a larger community and world. And so Christianity, I think Satanism, at least in the way that it's kind of presented as this kind of radical individualism, doesn't allow that. In fact, the way we become godlike, the way we attain all of that power is actually collaboratively. And I think that's the core idea of Christianity, is that we do have to collaborate. We do have to work together. We do have to join ourselves to communities of other people. That's how we attain to being like God.
So, explain to me how, if you are a Christian, right, and you have a medical issue, you believe in science, so you're obviously going to speak to your doctor. What exactly is the role in prayer, of prayer? Because you still hear all the time people who are like, oh, you don't need to go to the doctor, certain sects of Christianity, just pray about it. I mean, I see this like literally all the time online. They didn't pray hard enough. Or you hear about people all the time like, oh, he has this drug addiction he can't get over because like he just needs to pray about it, that sort of thing. Right. What is the practical role of prayer in your view, if you think that like fundamentally science is going to be the thing that solves cancer, I'm sure, and all these other ailments of the human body? What good is prayer? And are those people, are they like bad Christians because they believe in prayer in your sense, or are they, is that to their benefit? Like, does God smile upon that because they have more, quote unquote, more faith in prayer than someone who's like maybe like a super pro science would?
Yeah, so if I get sick tomorrow, I'm going to pray. And I'm going to pray, not because I know something is going to happen, but because I don't know that it won't happen. And in fact, we have a a large body of scientific literature that says that we have we normally call it the placebo effect. People spontaneously heal when they are in a, often in a case of like a authority figure, say a doctor, prescribes them something, right? And they spontaneously heal. And I would take that as an indication that people in general do have capacity for healing that extends beyond, just the kind of like, immediate effects of particular medical interventions. I'm not saying anything supernatural, but we just have these healing capacities that we seem to be able to tap into when we are given permission to by authority, by community, by people who love us. And so I'm going to pray, and I'm going to ask for prayers, and I'm going to hope that that has some positive effect on me and others. At the same time, I'm definitely going to pursue all of the known scientific medical interventions to deal with it. And because we know that that there is some kind of quantified thing, which I just talked about. We also know there are quantified things we can do, right? And I want to do both. And of course, I want to do the quantified ones as well. Now, that's my personal, how I would navigate it personally, right? The larger question is like, what is our society supposed to be doing when we see an outbreak of,
Right.
Of a new disease or whatever? What should we do? Well, I think if you're a religious person, you should pray, and then you should seek. You should go to your church or whatever, and you should say, how can we intervene in this? And maybe one of the answers would be, we can help invest in providing medical care to our community. Maybe one of the answers would be, we could invest in research to discover potential cures. Maybe one of the things would be, we would better educate people on how to avoid these diseases, that kind of thing. And so I think historically this has been understood. Jesus calls his followers to heal the sick, and for that reason, people have historically built hospitals. And so you look around, and there are hospitals all over the place called things like St. Thomas and St. Jude and St. Mary and so forth, right? Because there has been this tradition within the Christian faith of actually actively working on medical care, medical research, and so forth as part of the outworking of our Christian faith. And that's what I believe in.
That's interesting. Just a couple of days ago, I was listening to a podcast. It had a Harvard medical doctor on, and it was Dak Shepard's podcast, Expert on Expert. Yeah, this I forget the guy's name, but fascinating talk about. He's this guy's looking into research that shows that it's a there's a metabolic problem underlying a lot of mental illness, and he's has really fascinating evidence about this. Like your mitochondria, of all things, apparently has a lot to do with depression and anxiety. It's not necessarily something in their brain; it's more like a diet thing at some level. Really fascinating. But like one thing he said is that if you have, I believe it was seizures. Fasting is a really great way to get past that. And he was saying that even like in the Bible, like we've known this for thousands and thousands of years, that Jesus one time said there was this girl who was having seizures, and he said, pray for her and also have her fast. So it wasn't like just pray for her. It was also like do this fasting thing and like apparently that's even like modern medicine says that that's a good idea. Really fascinating. I mean, I would love to actually, have a actual, great debate about like a pro or con religion, that sort of thing. But I running short on time. I actually want to end on a nice note where we totally agree. I think this is really great. You tweeted not too long ago, quote, "My religion is a flourishing of life." I thought that was just very well said. I think that that's something that, all people, I think, could get behind if you say that, like, my religion is a flourishing of life. That's very humanist of you. It also is very Christian. Tell me a little bit more, like, where your mind was at when you wrote that.
Yeah, absolutely. I do hope it is something that we can all agree on, and I think we can think of it, broadly as life as a whole, right? Life as a whole, the ecosystem and all potential life that might emerge and so on. I think it matters. Like it has value. It has value in the cosmos, and we should be looking at how we protect and cultivate life and how we actually help it expand. And so I think even if you don't place a lot of value on human beings, some people don't, I think you should probably think about the antelope and the and the all of the other creatures that live here, and think about how we can actually preserve and expand life. And that actually does, I think, require us to be transhumanists, because the planet is doomed if we don't actually engage in kind of long-term planning, long-term multi-planetary work. And that's going to require that we expand beyond our current capacities in all kinds of ways, right? And I would say that this is sort of what we are here to do. We are the only creature in the ecosystem that can anticipate the far future, that can look for problems that are coming. If there's a killer asteroid tomorrow, we're going to be the ones that are going to have to figure out how to deflect it so that life survives. And so, yeah, I think moving into taking up that kind of responsibility and role, and then steering towards a future where life continues to flourish and thrive at larger and larger scales, I think that's what we should adopt. And if we do that, like I said, I think that's going to require not only that we kind of become transhumanists, but also that we adopt some core values about relationship, ultimately, about trust and cooperation and compassion and love. And I think if we have a future of a vast, expanding, thriving ecosystem of compassionate, loving, caring life, I think that is, about as close to heaven as we can imagine.
That's great. Yeah, I like that a lot. So tell everyone a little bit about what you're up to now and where they can find out more about you.
Yeah, so ChristianTranshumanism.org, which you cited earlier, that's probably the main place where people should look for information on us. We're trying to put more content up there, some of which you've seen. We've also been exploring courses. We've spent the last month doing kind of an in-depth course on some of this stuff. So we're working on rolling some of that out. And if you want to discuss that with a number of us, we have a pretty active Facebook community. You can just find it through our website. We also have a bit of a Twitter presence, and I'm Micah Redding, and you can find some of my writings at micahredding.com.
That's great. Well, Micah, thanks so much for coming on. That was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Peter. It was great to meet you.